Hey everyone! So I'm going to go over how inheritance works in this demo. So what I already have here is a main file that's creating an employee, and I have an employee.java file that has some basics in here. So I'm importing the java.util.date so that I have a date for our new hire date, so when we hired the employee. I also have a private string for their name, and the public constructor here goes ahead and gives us a default name and a default date for the employee and when they're added to the system. The toString returns the name and the hire date as a string, and you can see the output of what that looks like down here because that's all I'm doing in the main file over here. Now, what I'm going to do next is go ahead and create a hourly employee.java. All right, and this is going to be pretty much the same as what uh, we were seeing before. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the basics of how we're going to actually create a child of the employee class. Now I didn't mention this before, but there is important keywords when we're doing this. So public class is still what we're doing because it's still a class, and we're going to go ahead and call it hourly employee. Now the important thing here is we actually need the keyword extends so that we make sure that we're extending the parent class. So the parent class is employee, and this allows us to make sure that we have a nice hourly employee baseline for our class that we're writing here. So if I go back to the main here and I create a hourly employee, we're just going to call it E2 for now, is equal to new hourly employee. What's going to happen is that it's going to print out something very similar to what's being printed out for E1, which was the regular employee that we hired. All right, so here, if we print it out, you're going to see the output basically twice, hopefully with slightly different date times, so that we can see the difference there. So you can see that we have the same thing printed twice. They're two different objects being printed, however, and one is an hourly and one is a regular employee. Now, when we do this, we actually probably have some unique aspects of what this employee has, right? One of the things that an hourly employee has that not necessarily every employee has is a rate per hour, right? So we have a per hour wage, and we're just going to make that a private integer, and we're going to call it wage. And then we also want our constructor to properly set this wage to be whatever the default is for our organization. So we're going to write a constructor here, and it's going to be public hourly employee, and it's going to just be a default constructor. We're not going to be doing anything fancy here. This is not necessarily the recommended way to do it, but this is just to make it simple for the purposes of demonstration. Now we want to set the name and the date just like we did before, so we're just going to go ahead and call the super constructor. This calls the employee constructor, so we don't have to rewrite that code. Now the other thing we have to do, we still have to set the wage, so we're just going to say wage is equal to 10, and this is the wage per hour, so we're going to say that they make $10 an hour. So now when we run this, we aren't really going to notice any difference, right? Because we haven't really changed anything about how this works. So if we go ahead and run this, we're still going to see that it's a Jane Doe and their hire date. Now, let's say that we actually want to change how this prints out. We want to see how much this hourly employee makes so that we can compare different hourly employees' wages. So maybe we go ahead and write a new public toString method like we've seen before. And instead of just printing out what we saw before, we're going to actually print out the super.toString. So we're going to print out the normal, but we're also going to add to that, the wage. So if we add on to the end here, we're going to say that they make, how much they make at the end, we can see what that looks like. So this super.toString is going to call the employee toString, and then we're just going to add on a little bit to that so it's just a little bit different. And this is a pretty common way to do this. Oh, I forgot an operator here. Let's go ahead and fix that. All right, so now that that's compiling, we should see when it prints out that we'll have two slightly different printouts now. So there we go. Now we see that the wage for the hourly employee is 10. Now something else that we can do is we can have an employee, right? So let's make a third employee. Actually, we're going to go ahead and do this in a block down here. So we're going to do a normal employee. We're going to call it E3. And this, we're actually going to set it to that hourly employee. This is called upcasting for the employee, for the hourly employee. So we're upcasting the new hourly employee into an employee field. And then we're doing system.out.println, and we're just going to go ahead and print out E3 and see how that's different than either of the other options that we had. So here with the employee 1, which is a normal employee, it prints out just the name and the date. E2 prints out name, date, and wage. E3 prints out name, date, and wage as well, because underneath it all, even though it's an employee here as a variable, it's really an hourly employee, so it's going to behave as such. And that's part of that upcasting that I mentioned in the previous video when I talked about how this looks in and the purpose of inheritance. All right. So we can do another subclass of hourly employee. It would look very similar to this. We'd change the name here to be maybe it's a full-time hourly employee, and they would extend hourly employee instead of employee. And we could do something very similar there. But here you saw the example of using the super operator keyword, and we also saw redoing a constructor as well as overriding a previously defined method. So this is just a small example of how this would work. Keep in mind that this hourly employee can't actually access its own name. So even if we tried to set the name here, we want to be able to do that. So for example, if we decided to get a public, let's do a public string get name here, and we wanted to try to return the name of the hourly employee. So we return this dot name, right? And then in this main over here, instead of printing out system.out.e2, we're going to print out .get name. This should actually throw us an error. We're not going to be able to do this. And the reason for that is we don't actually know what name is. It has private access in an employee. So our employee said that that was private, which means that our child classes can't actually see that. So if we wanted our child classes to be able to see it, you're going to have to change it to protected, or you're going to have to change it to public. And in this case, then we'll be able to see it as an hourly employee, right? And which you see here. And that allows us to then access and modify it from the child class. Otherwise, we have to define these in that parent class. All right, I will share these files with you in iLearn, so make sure you check there for the files if you can't read them clearly here.